Well, welcome and good morning, and thank you for choosing this service. All of our other services have been full so far this morning, like I said, including at Hebron, which is so exciting. And I got so many text messages from you guys there saying it's going good, and that's great. Hopefully it doesn't crash now. Just kidding. No, it's going good. That's good. And everybody here, thank you for coming. The jail campus, hello and welcome. And man, I hope you guys had a good week. I had a pretty rough week personally, and here's why. It got cold, and putting the boats away for me is like a little funeral every single year that absolutely breaks my heart. And I don't know about you guys, but when I have to put that sweet old girl away, it's just, oh, so sad. And my wife is like, why can't you enjoy the life that you have? I mean, don't you love family? I'm like, I do. I just like family at the lake, you know, and what's wrong? I'm happy 5 months out of the year, and I'm just miserable and depressed for the other 7. Like, what's the big deal with that? It's a big deal. But anyway, I got a good message for you that I want to bring today. We are in the second week of our series called Warrior. And man, this series is all about becoming a gritty, relentless, not giving up type of person, somebody with a warrior spirit. And one of our staff core values is to have a warrior spirit. It's a big deal. We take it really seriously. And I think part of following Christ is having a warrior spirit. That's what we're talking about. And today I've got a key passage that I want to read to you. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to read the whole passage right at the start, and then we're going to unpack it as we go through the message. And this passage, I think, is one of the most seminal passages in the whole Bible as far as being a Christian and a warrior. And so I think you're really going to like it. I think it's really important. It's not going to make sense at first, probably, but then as I talk about it, it'll make more sense, hopefully, unless I do a terrible job. If you would, turn in your Bibles on your phone, or if you brought a paper Bible, to 2 Corinthians 5:18 through 21. No worries if you don't have one. I'll put it up on the screen too. But I recommend using something called the YouVersion Bible app, Brittany. I really like it. It's super helpful for me because we can do like Bible studies with people on it, and it also has like concordances to explain what you're reading if you don't get it. And you also can listen to it in your car, which is a big deal for me. So I do a lot of that. But anyway, if you're new to church, the Bible is not one big book. It's a collection of 66 books bound into one big book. And this book that we're turning to was written to the church in the ancient city of Corinth by this dude named Paul. And what I love about Paul is he's not just the greatest pastor of all time, he's also undisputably one of the most remarkable shapers of the Western world. And what I love about Christianity in general is that there's so much corroboration between it and what we know of archaeology and history. And Paul's a really incredible historic figure. But in 2 Corinthians 5 and verse 18, it says, "And all of this is a gift from God who brought us back to himself through Christ. And God has given us this task of reconciling his people to him." It's a good task. "For God was in Christ reconciling the world to himself, no longer counting people's sins against them." Amen, that's good. And he has given us this wonderful message of reconciliation. So we are Christ's ambassadors. God is making his appeal through us. And we speak for Christ when we plead, "Come back to God." For God made Christ, who never sinned, to be the offering for our sin, so that we could be made right with God through Christ. Let's pray. Jesus, I thank you for your transcendent, timeless word. I pray this morning, as we learn about it, Lord, you would reveal your heart for us. I pray for every person here, God, regardless of belief, I ask that we could leave with a deeper commitment to a warrior spirit for Christ and his kingdom. In Jesus' name we pray. Amen. So this series is all about a warrior spirit. We're in week 2. If you're watching online after the fact, I'd highly recommend watching week 1 first before you go into week 2. It's critical. We laid a foundation for the whole series with week 1. But last week, if you remember, we learned that we are in a battle, that Satan is the enemy, that you are a warrior, praise God, that we fight together and that God wins. And it was so much fun getting to hoot and holler and act up here. I mean, I know you guys enjoyed it, but I love hooting and hollering more than you guys do. It's a lot of fun. Felt good. And good news feels good. Right? Phil, we live in a dark world, and there's a lot of scary stuff happening right now, and sometimes it's easy to sit here and be like, are we gonna win? And then being reminded yeah, no, God does win in the end. It's like relieving. It's like, oh yeah, he does. It's good. But this week, I wanna talk about strategy. I wanna zoom in for a moment on this little point right here. Because I think of all these points, this is probably the one that is most difficult. This "we fight together" thing right here. I mean, I think a lot of times as humans, we spend a lot of time not fighting together, right? We fight against each other. We fight with one another against each other, right? I mean, politically, right? At work sometimes, as a family, and then also as Christians, we fight with each other. That's no good, right? So I want to talk about how to fight together. And really, I want to teach you how to be a leader that people want to fight with and fight for. right? So even if you're not a Christian, I think there's gonna be a lot of help in this message for you. I wanna start with a story. As many of you know, I grew up in the beautiful, vast, frozen tundra of Minnesota. And I'm talking Minnesota before global warming was a big deal. I'm talking like when we had so much snow, you had to wear snowshoes so you would not drown in the snow, right? You had to be careful about your kids. You didn't want them to suffocate from falling beneath the snow, like top surface and everything. And it was a big deal, a lot of snow. Anyway, and we used to do this thing, and I know you young people might not like know about this, but let me explain. We used to do this thing where we would go outside. You know what I mean? Like, and like play, you know what I mean? Without phones or anything like that. And then we would actually interact face to face. You know what I mean? We would emoji in real life. We would like smile and interact and laugh. I know, crazy, crazy, crazy. No facial muscle atrophy for us, right? So it was a big deal. We used to play together as a neighborhood. And we would get in these big, amazing snowball fights, right? And we would spend a ton of time building our stronghold, our fortress, our Helm's Deep, where we would have boys versus girls, as was often the case. And for us, we were in that hellish period between the ages of 11 and 12 where the girls were stronger, smarter, and faster. Do you remember that? I mean, that was a terrible time period, and we took a lot of L's as the boys. The summer games were terrible, right? Summer is so brief in Minnesota, and I mean, we lost Ghosts in the Graveyard. We lost Kick the Can. We lost Capture the Flag. We were like the Minnesota Vikings. I mean, it was just embarrassing all the time. Did you know that the play, the Hail Mary, was literally invented in a game against the Minnesota Vikings, right? The losingest team in sports history. It's just terrible, okay? Heartbreaking. We lost, and I was tired of losing. And we're in this snowball fight, and the girls had spent, in Minnesota too, it doesn't really get warm in the winter, so to make a snowball, you have to blow on the snow, and warm it up, and then you form it into a snowball. So a snowball making is like a craft, it's special, and, you make your snowballs and you put them in this repository where you keep them, for the real battle. And the girls had unleashed some of the finest snowballs they had crafted in the depths of their evil snowball forges. And they were releasing them upon us for what seemed like hours, and I knew their arsenals must be nearly depleted. I would say the universe knew that their attack must be answered. Their attack must be answered. Justice must be served. It was our honor, it was our calling, and it was our duty to fight back. So from deep within our battered trenches in the heart of our stronghold, I cried out to my battered brethren. I said, for too long, we have allowed the girls to enslave us, to force us to do their bidding. This is our time to fight back. We will not go silently into the night. We will not vanish without a fight. In their arrogance, they have expanded too quickly. Their arsenals are empty. So let us rise to the glory set before us and fight for all boy kind. This is our time, right? With a foolish courage, I ran from the trenches, imagining the fearsome sight to behold that would be the boys rising behind me as one. I imagined scenes of glorious victory playing out in my mind, but I was immediately pelted with a hellacious barrage of snowballs, the likes of which I'd never seen or imagined in my life. And as I fell to the ground, I saw that none of my comrades had charged with me. Also, I burst into tears. I was 11, guys, whatever, okay? I was alone, surrounded by the enemy. And as I breathed my last breaths of free air, I was confronted with the reality that I had been abandoned. And it's a childish story, but it actually hurt, right? My 11-year-old heart, it wasn't that I was getting pelted in the face with snowballs. That, mind you, is not comfortable. What the problem was that I'd been abandoned and rejected. Have you ever done that? Gina, have you ever tried to lead something great and have people follow you only to be rejected? I don't know. Maybe you tried to lead a life group and nobody showed up. Maybe you held a birthday party for someone who was going to be a big deal and whatever, and then like very few people that you invited came. They all flaked because it's 2020 and people flake. Maybe you tried to raise funds for a meaningful cause or whatever it was, and not very many people gave. And, you tried to lead, but nobody followed. I think so many of us have been in a moment like that. Again, this was a childish story, but I think in a lot of ways it's reflective of my relationship with Jesus. I think it went just like that snowball fight. I remember discovering that God was real and I wanted to follow him. And I looked at my friends and my family and I said, let's go, and we were gonna go and it was gonna be great. And, we were gonna dab on Satan and whatever, and it was gonna be awesome. And then nobody came with me. And I was like, what's wrong? I look at the world, it's so obviously real. You have to be superstitious and stubborn or ignorant to reject Jesus. Like, he's obviously real. There's so much evidence. And not only is he real, but he's like the best. Following him consistently makes the world a better place. It relieves human suffering. Like, we know this, right? We know that secularism and particularly atheism and also like uninvolved religiosity is a recipe for disaster. We know that the teachings of Jesus are the best. We know this. But just like the snowball fight, I'm like, guys, let's go. But then nobody goes. And I think the big question of the day when we lead things is, why don't people want to follow me into the snowball fight? We're called to fight together. And this is the big question I think a lot of us have. And today I want to talk about it. If you want to become a leader that people love to follow, I think you're going to like this message. It's a simple three-pointer. I know Brittany's like, thank God. It's just a three-pointer. I can't handle some of Pastor John. I mean, John last week, five deals. I mean, I can't even handle that many with mittens on. It's crazy, right? So this message, I mean, you could. I can't, right? But I didn't go to the Christian school like you did. But anyway, point number one, really simple here. I think one of the reasons people don't want to follow leaders is they must understand and believe in the purpose that we're fighting for. And this was my big snowball problem. I was a late bloomer. And my purpose at 11 was to defeat the girls, right? I wanted to defeat the girls. The girls were my sworn enemy. They must lose. Turns out that a lot of my friends had reached this place where they didn't want to defeat the girls. They wanted to kiss the girls, right? And so, huge thing, totally didn't understand it for me, did not compute. But I think the big question for a lot of us when we fight is, what really are we fighting for? Do I believe in this purpose? I mentioned last week, talking about troop morale, I said, the big determiner of troop morale is, do you really believe in the purpose that you're fighting for? And I think when it comes to Christianity, we don't do a very good job of very clearly and concisely communicating our purpose. If I asked you guys, what are we really fighting for as Christians, I'd probably get a lot of answers. Like up in Hebron, you guys would answer one thing. You guys would probably say it's all about God's glory, right? Other places, you might say it's all about depopulating hell and populating heaven, right? Some of you might say, well, I'm an Enneagram type 5, right, Steve? Like, it's the truth, and that's all that matters is it's the truth and it's facts. And if it's the fact, then that's what it is, and who cares about anything else? Some of you might say, well, it's about making the world a better place, right? And we have a social mission to liberate the oppressed, and that's what we're called to do. Some of you might say it's about loving God and loving people, right, Pastor? You say that one all the time. Some might say it's like about not sinning as much. And those are all mostly good answers. And even if you're not a Christian, I'm sure you've wondered, like, but really, what is the purpose? Like, what's the purpose, though? This is an important question. I've talked about a lot of different things. Remember, I've talked about the most important commandment, right? Love God and love people, right, Ken? That's what we're called to do. You know that, I know that, right? That's the most important commandment. Then we talk about the Great Commission. Some of you have heard this, but Jesus commissioned us to make disciples of all the nations of the earth to show people who Jesus is. But what's the purpose behind it? Like, why make disciples? Why love God and love people? Why not sin? That's the real question. And God's pretty clear on this. I want to spend some moments talking about this with the next 2 points. But Paul starts our key passage out today in verse 18. What does he say? He says, all this is a gift from God who brought us back to himself through Christ. And God has given us this task, this purpose, this meaning of reconciling people to him. This is a big deal, right? God's big purpose for our life is to restore broken relationships. Now, what's interesting to me, and I didn't know this, maybe you knew this, but I'm just behind, but God defines sin as anything that hurts relationships. And as a kid, and I don't know if you ever wondered this, but as a kid for me, I was always like, why does God tell us we can't do anything that's fun? You know what I mean? Like, I love sinning. Sinning's a ton of fun. My Sunday school teachers were like, if you sin, you're gonna feel lousy. And I'm like, you don't know how to sin right, because I love it. I don't feel lousy at all. I feel great when I sin, right? And I don't wanna do this. Like, it doesn't make sense, God, right? I didn't wanna follow him. But then I remember my dad starting to talk to me about God's purposes for my life. And I just began to realize it makes more sense than I thought it did. I think a lot of people don't want to go in the snowball fight with us because they don't understand the purpose behind it. When I was taught about God's purpose, all of a sudden I could see that not sinning was worth it. Lying. Why does God say don't lie? Well, specifically, he tells us not to lie because it hurts relationships. Think about this. Because of progressive agendas, we live in a society that really doesn't value truth anymore, right? We say truth is up to you, right? Whatever you say, truth is, that's truth. So we live in a world of lies. Has that hurt relationships in American society, having no truth? Yeah, absolutely, right? Because everybody's shouting at everybody else, and here's my truth, and this is what I think, and blah, 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 all the time. And lies hurt, right? Lies hurt relationships. I see that. What about this one? Sex outside of marriage between one man and one woman. It's like, God, why do you care? Why do you be up in my business, right? I mean, who cares about that? Well, it's because it hurts relationships. I mean, we know statistically, if you look at the Bumble, Snapchat, Tinder generation, like profoundly low levels of relational satisfaction, because it turns out that doesn't bring satisfaction. God's plan is best. I don't know anyone who's like 65 years old, and they say to their grandkids and spouse on their 40th wedding anniversary, you know, one piece of advice, I'm so glad for the last 40 years I never deleted Tinder, because whenever your grandmother and I got in a fight, I just swiped right all the time. It's really blessed her. You know what I mean? Nobody would say that. Why? Because it turns out sinning hurts relationships. It does. God's plan makes sense. It's a blessing. And, you know, we look at they call them the post-marriage generation, but the generation that really never gets married. There's profound relational dissatisfaction. And what we're learning is the children of that generation are hurt the most, because it turns out that having a home where the parents aren't together, like, you know, sometimes it's easier for the parents, but it's very, very painful for the kids. This is why God's plan makes sense. Pride hurts relationships. Unforgiveness hurts relationships. Greed hurts relationships. Selfish ambition hurts relationships. And when I began to understand God's purpose, I was like, okay, I can get behind that. Like, that makes sense. You know, it's not just God being like, miss out on fun. It's like, oh yeah, no, he wants us to experience great relationships. I think the big reasons our kids, our spouse, our children, people won't come with us in the fight for God's kingdom is they don't understand God's purpose. But once you get it, it's like, who wouldn't want to do that? That's beautiful. Like, I want to do that. That's a really good thing that I want to be a part of. You know, you hear it and it's like reconciling brokenness. Oh, okay, I want to do that. Christianity has never been about legislating morality. It's not about a political kingdom. It's about a spiritually transformational one to win hearts and to heal broken relationships. This is why at church, what do we always say? We say, no one's perfect and everyone's welcome. I don't care if you had an affair last night, you're welcome here today. Right? Because we serve a God who specializes in fixing broken relationships. That's what he does. That's the purpose of God. This is a place about forgiveness and reconciliation. And if you want people in your life to fight for Christ and his kingdom with you and embrace a Christian warrior spirit, you got to show them the purposes of God. It's a movement of reconciliation. That's it. Point number 2, I think a lot of times people don't want to follow Jesus because they don't see the value in fixing relationships. Right? My friends didn't see the value of fighting the girls. They're like, what, getting blasted in the face with a snowball? John, they're too powerful. They're too strong. These girls are like ogres. They're so big. We can't defeat them, right? And they were much stronger than we were. They didn't want to do it. I think the reason some people in our lives don't want to come with us for Jesus is because they do see the purpose. They just don't see the value in the purpose. I love what Paul says here in verse 19. He says, for God was in Christ reconciling the world to himself. We know that's the purpose of Christianity, fixing broken relationships. No longer counting people's sins against them. And he gave us this wonderful, another translation could say valuable message of reconciliation. No longer counting people's sins against them. That's really valuable. That's really awesome. No longer counting people's sins against them. I don't know if any of you watched the dumpster fire that was our presidential debate this last week, but it was rough, okay? America lost, okay? Who won, who lost? I don't care. America lost. It was bad, okay? And here's the thing. Here's why. I don't think it was the candidate's fault. I think it was just a caricature of our culture. Right? And we live in a culture that says, we're gonna hold your sins against you forever. If you screwed up in 1975 and it's on tape, we're gonna hold it against you forever. People can't change, it's all your fault, always, always, always. Not my fault, it's your fault. And a world where we always count people's sins against them is a really bad world, right? That's not a nice place to be. Before the teachings of Jesus, this is simply America, or simply the world, right? And what made America a unique place is we believed in second chances. We were a country that embraced this part of who Jesus is. We don't always count people's sins against them. We can forgive, and it was a wonderful place to be. Suddenly, when you see this is Jesus' purpose, there's like great value in that. It's like, even though I don't like having to forgive people, I like being forgiven, and I like being in a society that can forgive. There's value in that. At the end of life, it's relationships that people will value the most. And this is a big deal, right? If we can't reconcile broken relationships, then we will have no relationships in life because all relationships get broken at different times. I think real warriors fight for things that are truly valuable, and relationships are valuable. I try to teach my kids the morality of Jesus, but I don't just want them to see the morality, the purpose. I want them to see the value. Don't lie because lying hurts relationships. And I want you to see specifically what you're losing because of your lies in this household. Don't sleep around because it hurts relationships. And we've actually begun to be honest with our oldest about how mom and dad's choices sexually before we were together have hurt us now. Because I don't want to just call her to the purpose and the path of purity. I want to show her the value of sexual purity in her life. I want them to see the purpose and the value. Because only with those two things can you really embrace the warrior spirit. You know, I have, as a pastor, the privilege of being with a lot of people as they walk into the sunset of their life, as they die, right? And I've gotten to be with many people at the end of their lives, and I've never met someone who was like, you know what? I really wish I could have traveled more. I really wish you could show me my 401k balance one more time. Can you just hold that in front of my face right before I die? Right, that's the end, last words. I've never met anyone who's like, I wish I could have restored one more car. I never met anyone who's like, I wish I could have just fished more. If I had one more day to live, just one more day, I would go hit a round of golf at SP19. That's what I do, right? No, not that this is a bad golf course. It's always, what do they always say? Always, always, always. I wish I could hold my wife. I wish I could see my grandkids. I can't wait to see my mother, my father again. I can't wait, or I wish I could celebrate my daughter's 30th birthday. I'm gonna miss it. It's always, always, always relationships that matter the most, right? Always at the end of life. Everybody, always. God created you for relationship with him and with his people, and his purpose for you is to restore broken relationships with God and with people, because that is what is most valuable to us as humans, period. I think one of the big mistakes that people make is screwing up experiences, material things, and relationships. Okay? This is a big mistake. People all the time, their number one priority for their kids so often seems to be giving them great experiences and great possessions. I want my kids to see all the states. I want them to be on the best traveling teams. I want them to have the TPX bat with the TPX batting gloves and the TPX everything and whatever. I want them to get the best, to see the best, to experience it all the time. And I think what happens is we're raising a generation that is rich in experience, but poor in relationship. Rich in material things, rich in experience, but poor in, and this is a huge mistake. I'm not saying that experiences are bad. I'm not saying that material things are bad. I just think they're a tool that we leverage so that we can have what's most important in life. I've heard some people say, but pastor, sociologically, all the research tells us that experiences are far better to invest in than material things. That's true. That's true. They do provide a marginally higher benefit to your life satisfaction. Experiences do. But far higher than experiences and material things are relationships, right? You can see the whole world and have lots of stuff, but relationships are what matter most, period. I mean, that's true. Like sociologically, that's true. God's word is right, and I love that, and it's, seconded by Scripture. Experiences, material things are tools that we leverage for great relationships. And when I make choices for my family, the guiding star for us is how will this help our relationships? Right? When I'm making decisions for my kids, for my family, how will this investment of time and treasure and experience, right? One of the reasons I like a boat is, for me, it turns out having 4 kids is super expensive, and buying a 27-year-old carbureted ski boat is pretty cheap to maintain, cheap to have, cheap to use. And I can have 30 days of summer as a family on that boat. No phones. We're chapped on a 20-foot boat together, so that helps relationships or destroys them in a ball of fire. One of the two. But look, for us, when we're trying to make choices about and I know some families do traveling sports and it's really good for you and that's great because you leverage it for relationships. But for me and my family, we just have really evaluated it. And for us, that's not an investment we want to make. I'd have to work lots of side jobs and lots of extra to pay for it. And I'm not going to pay someone to play soccer with my kids when I can just play soccer with my kids in the backyard. You know what I mean? That was a decision that we came to as a family. And for me, more importantly than all of that is I value eternity for my children. Right? And I want to have a good relationship with them on earth, and maybe, these different things are opportunities and avenues to do that. But more importantly, I want to have an eternal relationship with my kids in heaven, right? So we're not going to compromise anything that we think, in any way that we think would detract from that. And family is a lifetime, but eternity is forever, and we want to invest in that. I talked with a friend of mine who has been in church his whole life, and in this church his whole life. And I asked him, I said, what is your best experience here? And he said it was a work trip to Kentucky. I'm talking one of those work trips, like mission trips, where you get in a smelly 15-passenger van and, you work at a place that is basically the same as your house for free, and then you come home. And it's why is that a great experience? Well, it's because of the relationships that are formed on that experience. The best parts of life are not about experiences. It's the relationships that are formed during those experiences. This guy has gotten to travel the world. He's done some pretty lavish vacations. But a work trip with a bunch of smelly families in a van in Kentucky, of all places, which is basically like Indiana with hills, was the travel highlight of his life because relationships matter. I look at the Instagram generation, and this is crazy. Brittany, you'll understand this with me, right? I mean, it's crazy to me that people, their life aspiration is to go to Paris and take a picture of themselves in Paris. It's really though? Why? Why try? It just blows my mind. If you don't leverage those experiences for developing lifelong, enduring relationships, we have a friendship desert in the youngest generation. They don't have friendships that endure. And look, I've been there too. When I was 22, this is so embarrassing. I don't even want to tell the church this, but at one point, I spent $120 or $130 on a Kelty backpack. Right, Kelty brand backpack. And I went to, REI is so dumb. It's all this stuff that, why do you need to go there? It's just a place that burns your money, and it's so tempting. And it's one thing to spend $120 or $130 on a backpack if you can afford it. I was eating ramen noodles and missing rent payments. And I go in there and I'm I'm gonna buy a Kelty backpack. I need this. I must have the quality, right? I mean, what is wrong with me? First off, my backpack that I had, which I already had a backpack, was just fine. You know what I mean? It was the equivalent of I think it was a Darkwing Duck backpack from first grade, but it doesn't matter. It's fine. It holds things. I don't need it, right? But I wanted it because I wanted to travel the world and see the sights and eat the food. And you know what? I did travel. I experienced the whole world with that backpack. I've been to every continent except for Australia and Antarctica. I've seen the sights. I've eaten the food. The relationships were fleeting. And ultimately, as I look back on my life, I think it was a poor allocation of time and resource. I think it was a poor investment. If I had it to do over, I wouldn't have done it because travel is not an end in and of itself. It's a tool that allows us to get to what matters, and we should leverage it. And Paul in this passage actually talks about the dichotomy of experiences and relationships. And this is what he says. He says, so we're Christ's ambassadors. What do ambassadors do? What do ambassadors do? They travel in order to reconcile broken relationships. This is why we travel. We're Christ's ambassadors, and God is making his appeal through us. We speak for Christ when we plead, come back to God. This isn't just a silly purpose. It's the most valuable thing we can do with our lives. And it's not just me saying it. It's not just the Bible saying it. You know what I love is that sociology and all that we have in sociological science typically confirms Scripture. And in this circumstance, it totally does. The most satisfied subgroup of Americans with the highest levels of life satisfaction are Christians. I love that. That's great. You know what the most unsatisfied group is? Atheists, agnostics, and people who are religiously nunned, right? They're not affiliated with religion. Lowest level of life satisfaction, highest level of psychological morbidities. Because it turns out that building a life around forgiveness and reconciling broken relationship is like pretty much the most valuable investment we can make. You know, I love this church for so many reasons, but one of the reasons I love this church is it's one of the last true diverse places in America. America is so divided, right? And at this church, I know this is crazy, but we are united by who we're for, not what we're against, right? We have rich, poor, old, young, educated, and uneducated here. And I know this is crazy. I know some of you are going to get like blown away, but we have Democrats and Republicans here. I know. You could be sitting next to somebody that you disagree with. Ah! You know what I mean? Like, that's crazy. That's just crazy. That's mind-blowing. And yet, that's a part of this church because we are united by who we're for, and we're about reconciling broken relationships. And like, that's part of the teachings of Jesus, and I think it's beautiful. We have this vision statement, right? We want to see generation after generation become fully devoted followers of Jesus Christ. And I love that. I love that we have old and young here. And we actually have two couples celebrating 50 and 65 years today, right? And every time we have a big deal. So 50, 60, 65, and 70 as a church, I like to celebrate from the front. But John and Jean Ann Ozier, 65 years. Let's give them a big round of applause. Joe and Kay Spurgeon, 50 years. Let's give them a big round of applause. John, after service, told me it's for better, for worse. John, for richer, for poor, sickness and health till death do us part. And that's it. Like, that's the commitment. He said, I took it seriously when I made it, and it hasn't always been easy. But I love that God's been faithful to us, and so I can be faithful to my wife, and she can be faithful to me, right? Wonderful words. And if you see him, tell him congratulations, fist bump him. But, I love this church because I can seek the wisdom of people who have been there. And it's so amazing to me, the consistent answer that I get when I talk to people who are older. They always say a couple things. They say, number one, John, relationships matter so much, so much. They say, enjoy it, it goes by quickly, right? Love your kids, relationships matter. And they always say, John, pastors come and go, but a church is for a lifetime. And I'm so thankful for that advice, right? I'm so thankful. It's moved me so much. I'm like, but pastors come and go. Do you want me to leave then or no? Okay, we're good. But I remember when I first moved here, John Ozier and I were hanging coat hooks in my house because I have no idea how to do anything, including I didn't know how to find a stud. He taught me how to do that in a house. But my wife knew how to find a stud though, hello. But anyway, but he was showing me how to do that and hanging up these deals. And he just talked to me about God's faithfulness. And he got emotional talking about God's faithfulness to him through this particular church. And he's been here his whole life, over 80 years. I won't say how old he is, but because I don't actually know. But he's been faithful to this church his whole life. It was just so cool to hear that story and to understand the way that God reconciles broken relationships and to see the life satisfaction that has brought him through thick and thin. If you want your kids and family and loved ones to fight with you, you have to show them God's purpose and the value behind the purpose. Restoring relationships that endure. It's what we'll value most in life. Third point, and this is a fast one, I promise, but I think people understand God's purpose and the value of the purpose, but they don't understand the process. And I know that this might be crazy. And Charles, growing up, I was a weirdo. And you might not know that about me. Most of you are like, we actually did know that. You don't need to say it, but I was a weirdo. And I read weird things. And I remember reading Sun Tzu's The Art of War. I remember reading about the Napoleonic Wars and reading about Napoleon's, failed conquest of Russia. I remember reading about World War I and World War II and the Eastern and Western fronts. I was just fascinated by it. And what we know about the process of war is your enemy becomes vulnerable when their supply lines become stretched and the repository of supplies is depleted, right? And we know this, right? We've seen this fail over and over again. And what my comrades at arms in Snowball Arms did not understand is that the girls had gotten arrogant and that they'd overexpanded and that we had a glimmer of hope after an entire summer of losses. This was our time and our moment of opportunity. We had to seize today, carpe diem. We could defeat these girls because they were overextended. But my comrades did not understand that. So they're just sitting there afraid in the trenches. And I was like, you guys, we could win right now. I know this is mean, but they were morons. You guys, we have to do this. And not exactly the same way, but in a similar way, I think a lot of Christians, just like they didn't understand the process of war, I think a lot of Christians don't understand the process that God uses to transform lives. And this is really interesting here. Paul wraps up his passage. He says, for God made Christ, who never sinned, okay? He never broke relationships, to be the offering for our sin. We broke the relationship. It was our fault, but he didn't care. He took care of it so that we could be made right with God through Christ. Ultimately, what happened is our broken relationship was restored. This is such a radical, upside-down statement, and don't miss this. God fixes broken relationships not by making justice be served, but by taking responsibility upon himself. Real warriors, they don't blame other people. They just take responsibility for what needs to be done. And I always think it's so cowardly and weak and sniveling to just sit there and blame others. It's their fault, and it's not my fault, and you don't understand. It's like 99% their fault, and I didn't even do it, and why would it, all this stuff. And listen, I don't care whose fault it is. What I care about is how are you gonna fix the problem, right? That's what a warrior spirit says. A warrior says, I will fix it. No matter what caused the situation that we're in, I can fix it. And I think we live in a society that has forgotten this. This was the cornerstone of following Jesus. But we live in a society that says, you're a baby and you're ruining the country, and if you don't like it, you should just leave, and blah, 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 blah. And, the other side says, I'm a victim and the system's broken and shame on you and it's systemic and broken and whatever. And regardless of the truth in those statements, and there's truth in both sides of that, regardless of sitting there saying it's your fault, it's your fault, it's your fault, regardless of that, real warriors just say, how can I help? That's the question we ask. That's the example that we have in Christ Jesus. It doesn't matter how we got here. The real question is, how can I take responsibility to fix this thing? I'll lay down my life. I'll sacrifice myself. This is a pastime that I have that is weird, but I think it's been a real big blessing to me is I love reading Congressional Medal of Honor citations, right? And every time I get emotional, I've read many hundred Medal of Honor citations. And who wins the Congressional Medal of Honor? Consistently, always, it's men who sacrifice. Oftentimes it's rewarded posthumously, but it's the highest medal that we have in the land. And it's warriors who serve out of love for their fellow brothers at arms. And I think this is what people miss about warriors. I think people assume that warriors are those big savages who take it all for themselves and they just overpower and they shout over people and they just, kick down the door and do it. That's not a warrior. Warriors serve, warriors love, warriors lay down their life for a relationship. They fight for a relationship. They're humble, they're selfless, they're others focused. This isn't just a Bible thing. This is like a widely known fact. This is who warriors are. And I think as a society, part of us have forgotten what a real warrior spirit is. It's humble. Lays down. This is how Christianity transformed the world. Christians said, love your enemies, pray for those who persecute you, lay down your life. And then, like this movement, this ideology, this forgiveness, transformed the world. It was so contagious and outrageous. It was so transformative. This is who Jesus is. This is what he did for us. Well, we had broken our relationship with God and with people through sin. Jesus didn't sit there and said, well, they did it, and so they should fix it. Instead, he said, I'll take the blame. I'll pay the price. That's a warrior spirit. And that's what we follow. Real leaders, they get people to fight together because they communicate the purpose. They see the value and they communicate it. And they help people understand the process. This is what we're called to do as Christians. This is what we're called to understand as Christians. And I think there's a step zero here, and that is doing it ourselves. I started with that story of, the snowball fight and whatever, and I talked about, leading and nobody coming with us. And I think one of the big issues that we're facing today, it's not that we're trying to lead and nobody's coming with us. That's a small portion of Christendom and of Christians today. I think the real problem is people are leading, but there's so many of us sitting in the trenches. We want to go, but we're afraid. We want to go, but various reasons and things and problems and stuff, and that's us, right? I think there's a lot of us, if we're being honest, our relationships with God and with people are struggling, languishing, not there. We're sitting here in the trenches. I don't want to go. I can't go. I'm afraid. I don't want to go up there, right? This life is so important. It's only a moment. It matters. I want to ask you, what does your relationship with God look like? Jesus was the ultimate warrior, and he said, I'll take care of your sin, which breaks relationship with God. I'll take it to hell if you let me. But you got to step out. You got to give it up. You got to give it to me. You got to let me take it. Sin hurts our relationship with God and with people, and I think maybe some of us came here to be reminded or told for the first time, it's time for us to get out of the trenches and trust God. And here's the thing. God doesn't call us as Christians to be the one who steps up in front of everybody else. He's the one who did that, right? So when we step out of the trenches, it's not like we're the only ones. We're right behind him, following him. That's Christianity. And I think there's so many of us through the COVID pandemic, we hunkered down. We got in the trenches. We got bombarded. And we're just sitting there. And Jesus says, this is our time. This is our moment. We're warriors. For Christ and his kingdom, for the world, for people, for our children, for our families, for our community, it's time for us to step up and fight for healing, to fight for reconciliation, to fight for forgiveness, to fight for understanding, to fight for community, to fight for humility. It's not popular, but it is, and it doesn't matter what your political affiliation is. We know those characteristics are what the world needs. That is what the world needs right now. And look, I could do and I'm not gonna, but I could do the usual heads bowed and eyes closed thing, but today we just decided to try something different. If your relationship with God is broken right now, and you look at it, maybe it was great, pre-COVID, maybe it was great back then, maybe you've never had one, but if your relationship with God is broken, your relationship with people is languishing, I just challenge you to text, I'm in, to 474747. I'm in to 474747, and we'll call you this week. Because I don't think church is about learning something interesting. Oh, that blew my mind. That was really interesting. No, that's not the goal of church. The goal of church is to see the gospel of Jesus Christ transform our lives. I would just like to challenge you to consider getting out of the trenches and say, this is my time. I'm ready to fight again. I'm ready to lay down my life again. I'm ready to serve again. I got some simple questions for you, and you can take a picture of this and you can journal about it. If you came with somebody, you can talk about it together in the car ride home. Fathers, husbands, mothers, I challenge you to lead the discussion with your family. But 4 simple questions. Do you have broken relationships in your life? And for me, I know that my relationship with God is languishing when all of my relationships are strained or broken, right? I know that the presence of God's Spirit creates compassion, empathy, love, and reconciliation in my life. And when I take an inventory, I say, man, all this stuff is strained. Like, I know there's something wrong. I just challenge you to take a real inventory of your life. Number 2, are you fighting to restore broken relationships with God and with people? Take an inventory of the way that you spend your time. You look at the pie chart, and if the vast majority of your time is spent fighting for other things, I would say maybe it's time to make a change, because I don't want to spend my life fighting for things that are not valuable. I want to fight for what matters. And I want to call you to do the same. We can't do that until we actually realize, man, I need to reallocate some resource. Number 3, do the people you lead understand the purpose, the value, and the process of God? As a father, I want my kids to be successful. I want them to have great marriages. I want them to be good, kind, educated people. But all of that pales in comparison. All that is relatively unimportant compared to their love for the Lord. And I always remind my wife and I remind my children, hey, this life is short. Eternity is longer, and eternity matters. And I don't want to send my kids to college prepared for college, but not prepared for eternity. So I talk to them, right? I want them to understand, hey, this isn't just what we believe. I want them to know why. I want to say it, spray it, wheel it, deal it, make them feel it. I want them to understand the purpose and the value and the process of following Jesus. And I want them to believe it deep in their heart with everything that they have. And I just challenge you to have that discussion with people in your life, people that you care about. I mean, this is an important question. And then lastly, I think it's so important as you listen to people, as you talk with them, as they express some issues that they have, ask them this question: how can I help? How can I help? How can I help you? How can I equip you? Ask yourself, what do I need to do? What is my role? Not what's their role. What did they do to me? And how did this happen? And how is it? Stop. Ask yourself, what can I do to bring about a solution? How can I embrace a warrior spirit? How can I serve? Jesus said that the Son of Man came not to be served, but to serve. Jesus said, love your enemy and pray for those who persecute you. It's so backward, but that is a warrior spirit. That's what we're called to. Now, that sort of wraps up my message for this week. I know that there's a big component in here that I didn't talk about, and Gina, I'm sure you caught it, but the thing that I I didn't forget, but the thing I wanted to talk about was fear, right? And that should have been woven into the whole thing, but then the message got to be 50 minutes long, and I know that you'd be hey, I gotta get out of here, okay? Too much time. So I cut that. Next week is called Do It Afraid. Do It Afraid. And I want to talk about how we deal with fear as a warrior, okay? Because I think that's a big component of some of our lives. Some of you guys are fearless, like Nevaeh, you're fearless. You ain't got no fear, right? And that's great. Me, I got fear. lots of it, fear for days. So I want to talk about how to deal with that next week. I think it's going to be really good. But this week, I just want to challenge you to go through these questions, take an assessment, and maybe for some of you, you need to change the way that you're living. As we close, I'd ask you to stand and let's pray. Jesus, I lift up this church to you. I thank you for your gospel. I ask that we could be people who are reconcilers of broken relationship. Thank you that while we were still sinners, you died for us. Thank you for reconciling our relationship to God in heaven. And as we look at a broken, hurting, divided, polarized country and world, I pray that you would use this church here in Hebron and in Wheatfield, the jail, online. I ask that you'd use this church to bring healing to broken relationships. I ask that you bring healing between people and their relationship with God today. Thank you for all that you are and all that you've done for us. It's in the matchless name of Jesus Christ. We ask and pray these things. Amen. The band is going to lead us in one last song together. Let's worship God together as we close.